And let's start with the cutting edge, then the point of the knife, the tip, then we have the spine, the heel. This is the part where you're chopping with, then the handle itself. There are many different types of handles, and then the butt of the knife and the tang. That's the entire knife. That's the knife that you use a lot. I'd like to show you some of the different knives that we use in the kitchen for these knife skills. We start out with the tapered knife, and the tapered knife is the most used knife, also called a chef's knife or a French knife. There are different lengths of the knives. This is a 10-inch, so you can use the different ones, whatever is most comfortable to you. But that's a knife that is used quite a bit. Then we have the serrated edge knife. And the serrated edge is very important. That can be the different types of knives that you can use there. But the main purpose of this knife is to cut through the crusts of French bread, to cut through different pie crusts. You can even cut tomatoes with this. So this is a very important knife to have. Then we have the Granton knife, and Granton refers to these cuts in the knife that are different than the serrated knife. It has a sharp edge, so it's used for carving and for cutting large pieces of meat. And then, of course, one of the most important knives, along with the French knife, is the paring knife. Use that in so many different things. Okay, let's review the different knives that we have looked at, and there are several other knives as well. We start out with the chef knives, and there is a large chef knife, usually 10 inches, and then we have a shorter chef's knife. This is really all depending on how you feel like, how they feel in your hand. And then we have a 8-inch chef knife. And the difference here is that the handle of this knife is all steel. And those are some of the newer knives that are being done today. So we have 3 different chef knives. The next item is a paring knife. And the paring knives come in all different types, but there are some very reasonable chef knives like this one here, and they work really well. Or you have, with the full tang, a knife that is also a paring knife. Being the main purpose of a paring knife is that the handle is no more than 3 to 4 inches long. We have the boning knives. The boning knife is something that is, the blade is stiff, so that it can be used to cut around the bone, and sometimes it is used like this here if you use it to go around the bone, and that should not be flexible, not even the slightest way. But then you have a fillet knife, and the fillet knife is actually very flexible. So when you fillet a fish or you skin a fish, that you can get very close to the skin. Then we have slicing knives. We have one that is with a point, and then the other one that is wide throughout, all the way to the end. And that is actually made when you're carving on a station. You carve a ham or a turkey. Once you carve with it, you pick up the meat and put it onto the plate. We go to the scimitar. Scimitar is a knife that's very similar to the filleting knife or the boning knife, but it's longer and it's more curved, and that's used for cutting steaks and those kind of things. The tournée knife, that's also called a bird's beak knife because it's curved. And what you do with that very short blade, less than 3 inches, and that is to have more steady movement when you carve something like tournéing. We have the Santoku knife. something that is very popular now. And basically, it's some people use it instead of a chef's knife, and it's used to pick up things as you're cutting things on your cutting board. The Chinese cleaver is an Asian knife that you know the Asian chefs use quite a bit, and they use it for everything. But if you're trained in this country, you probably don't use it except for some of the Asian dishes that you're cooking. We have a clam and oyster knife. The clam knife is like this here, very short handle and a very short blade, sharp on one side. So when you go to open a clam, that you can push it into the clam. The oyster knife is different. To use that to open an oyster at the hinge at the end of the oyster to just pry it open. Those are the knives that we have laid out here. Besides your knives, the most important tool in your kit is the honing steel. A honing steel is used constantly to hone or tool the knife blades. They come in many versions made out of steel, glass, ceramic, and diamond studded. When you hone your knife, there's two ways of doing it. One is the freestyle, so to speak, which looks like this. If you go very slow, you have your knife going down the steel, and you sharpen or you touching the whole steel as you go down. And it's on an angle. I want to show you about how the angle should be, because there's another way that you can do this. And this is where you stand the steel on your cutting board. And as far as the angle is going, this would be a 90 degree, this is 45 degree, and then this is about 22 degree. And that would be how the knife should be passing over the steel. And you go on both sides. You can go down on one side first, then do the other side. And this should be done to about up to 10 times. And sometimes you do it a little bit more. It doesn't really have to go that much. 8 to 10 times is plenty. So you go down the steel, and it straightens out the edge. It's not a sharpening device. Sharpening is quite different. This is just straightening out the edge of the knife, and it appears to be sharper. So you have different steels. The one I was using was a steel. Then you have glass. This looks very similar to this, but it's glass for very, very delicate knives. Then ceramic and a diamond studded. The ceramic, again, is for very delicate knives. Diamond studded is usually flat like this. It sounds different when you go down the steel, and it uses diamonds to make the steel more effective. That's the same thing that you do with that on both sides. If they're flat, it's a little bit easier. When you have the slicing knife, then that, because they're longer, you have to be more careful. Either way you're doing that, it does the same thing. And that is honing your knives, as opposed to the sharpening. A paring knife, very easy to hone. Either way you're doing that, fairly easy to do. And the steel that you use will do the same thing in this case, that you go and on that angle that becomes naturally to you. Now I'd like to show you how to set up a workstation and to get ready to cut vegetables. What you start out with is a sanitation solution that you wring out a towel and then sanitize your station. So that's really important, that you wipe wipe down your station with a moist towel with a sanitizing solution. This goes under the table. That's why we have a shelf under the table. And the first thing you set up is something under your cutting board. I'm using a plastic mat that will hold the cutting board in place. Then I'm putting up the cutting board right close to the edge, not over the edge, and it's now in place. Then I have my steel, my paring knife, and my all-purpose French knife or chef's knife that goes on one side or the other, in this case on this side, with the edges, with the cutting edges facing away from me. I need 3 bowls or 3 containers that I put a product in. One is for the finished product, the other one is for usable product, and the third one, or the first one, is for peelings. And that's unusable product if you want to use it that way. You bring that bowl onto your cutting board, pick up an onion, and to peel an onion, it's very important that you cut the root end off first. Why? Because there may be dirt in the root end, and if that gets on the cutting board, there could be a problem. While you're cutting it off, you sometimes catch the first part of the skin already, and you peel that down. And when you do that, you can also cut the top end off, cut a little bit off, and continue peeling off the skin, just like this. And then the next layer sometimes has a part that is also like parchment paper that needs to be cut off. There's a little part on top that's got to come off, and that's how to peel an onion with the root end intact, so when you cut the onion later on, it will not fall apart. Put that on the cutting board, set that over on the side, wipe off your knife. As soon as you finish with doing the job, lay it back on the side, and be ready to cut the onion. So before we move on with cutting the onions, I want to show you another way of peeling an onion, which is not necessarily the right way. So you pick up an onion, and some chefs will take a big knife, like a chef's knife, and cut off a piece on one side, cut off a piece on the other side, and then cut it in half. And usually throw the cutting board on throw the knife on the cutting board, and then peel off with their fingernails, peel off the skin. And it appears that that's not necessarily wrong, but the root end is right here on the cutting board. And that is maybe a bit faster, but it's not necessarily the right way. Other chefs will also take an onion with the root end attached, like I'm showing you here on a shallot, and they just cut it in half that way, and then start peeling off the skin. First of all, that's wrong, and it looks terrible to an observer. This is not professional, and we are wanting to behave like professional chefs. Can't even get it off here. So you have a mess on the cutting board. It doesn't look good. The root end is still there. You have to clean up everything. So it probably takes just as much time as doing it right. And we would like to do it right.